Hey, John, how's it going?
Going really well. How are you?
I'm doing really well. I'm excited to chat with you today. You're a new kind of friend slash contact that I've made through Lunch Club. I've been loving Lunch Club, man. For those people who just want to get on the phone and talk with cool people, that's a good idea. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to my audience?
Yes, thank you. First of all, I'm super excited to be here, by the way. I love when connections just get really deep very quickly, and that's kind of what happened. And Lunch Club is a great platform for that. My name is John Hill, aka Small Mountain. I'm the founder of a company called Adapted Growth, and we help people from sales and marketing as far as process, people, and tech. So along with that, I'm the founder of the Sherpa Method, which is a mindset-driven approach to selling, which allows people to sell while still feeling very ethical and in control of the conversations. And also an author of a book called Selling from Scratch that we launched about a year ago.
Wow, soon, like recently.
Fairly recently, yeah. We it all just kind of fell into place and have a lot that we've looked back at to figure out how that happened, and so that way we can duplicate it when we decide that we want to write more in the future, because I think there's a lot more to say about selling as a role.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, and that's why I wanted to bring you on the podcast because I actually started writing my own book last year or the year before last. I can't remember. And
Yes.
I got so stuck, especially with SEO. I mean, maybe selling's the same, but SEO changes. And so I was just feeling like, how do I write about something that's like so massive and yet so simple and yet like it changes? And so how do I? And so we started talking about that. And I thought we need to make a podcast episode because I know a lot of people listening have that book in their head. Maybe they've written it like 5 times and scrapped it. And the whole self-publishing options nowadays are fantastic. And it's
Yes.
almost like we have too many options. And so it's hard to take action. And
Oh
so
yeah.
I'd love for you to share, just to start, like what has been like the number one thing that has surprised you about that journey that you want to like, yeah, share with people thinking about doing it for themselves.
So I know I'm supposed to leave the best one for last. I know that's what you're supposed to do as a marketer, but I'm just going to lead with this thing.
Love it.
Removing myself from the editing process was the most meaningful thing that that helped, right? I'm very
Yes.
lucky in the fact that my partner of 19 years, my baby mama, she's amazing. Her name's Melissa, is an editor and had wanted to be an editor for a very long time before we decided to even work together. And so that allowed me the opportunity to just sit and write and write and write and write and write and write without any concerns at all about like, how's this going to look at the end of it, right?
Right.
And not everybody has an editor who they like spend their lives with, and that makes sense. But the creative process has got to be removed or separated from the editing process, right? And lots of creators I've talked to, because now that we've done this, I talked to lots of other authors and people who create things. They know this inherently, but they still struggle with it because there's this
Right.
idea of, well, let's just make sure it's good now. No, like you need time to kind of sit and think after you're doing creative work of like, was that garbage or was it like actually great and meaningful,
Mm-hmm.
so that's my first thing. Separate or disconnect yourself from the editing process so that way you can create without boundaries, because otherwise you're going to feel pressure to create something perfect, and nothing starts out perfect. It has to go through the process of being shaped and done if you're trying to resonate within a certain group of people, which is what you should be doing in a business book, in my opinion.
Yeah.
um, the second one is network, find a book coach, find someone who's done this, ask them about their process and everything. I was very lucky in the fact that I got connected with a book coach through a Slack community that I'm part of, not mine, but one that I'm a member in. And this person was so blown away with the level of the manuscript that I had put together, and that I already had an editor, that she was willing to help us for free, because she was just going to be kind of guiding and directing, and she still thinks that there's going to be room for us to work together in the future. So and this is what I love so much about networking, is you have huge opportunities to shave big like chunks of time off of your learning curve in your first rep, right? And the first rep is always the hardest one. When you're thoughtful about leaving that first rep, that first book, that first sales call, that first business, what did we do well? What do we need to improve? You can move with much more momentum the next time around. So that would be my second one. And then the third one is you're going to have some weird things that show up as uncomfortable once, like when you're in this process. And so for me, I've never talked about this on the podcast before. I was terrified, honestly, to read the book after Melissa had done her complete edit, right? Because she did a grammar edit first, so that way we could share with some pre-readers and share with some people, get some feedback. And then she did the final edit. And the final edit was based upon the feedback that we got from some pre-readers, which was hugely helpful. I had a little moment of being a little precious about my baby, if you will. And so some friends of mine and some other sales mentors and some other sales connections offered to read the book. And a couple of people were so great that they gave me like 3 pages of feedback. And I had this moment, this emotional response to, oh man, my book sucks. And it's like, no, I asked for this. I asked for them to help me make this thing the best thing that they possibly could. Why would I turn away from it right now? So thankfully, I had enough bandwidth to be like, don't be an idiot, John, because I can be remarkably dense at times, and hopped in there and read the feedback. And the feedback was all good. It helped tighten things up. So after that edit, Melissa was like, okay, great, here it is. Let's read this and let's go. And I had this moment of like I was nervous, right? And I didn't really know what I was scared of then, but I can talk about it now. Like I was concerned that her editing would kind of remove me from the book, that I wouldn't really be part of it anymore, that it wouldn't be my words. And like, I think that is something to be concerned about depending upon how you're going through the editing process. But it was just heavy and I felt uncomfortable about it. And so I was like, let me go read almost anything else, as opposed to reading this thing I need to be reading, which now I look back on and laugh and everything. But those were kind of the big 3 things. And then I got to talk to one person and he goes, you need to get comfortable doing 2 things if this is your first book. And I said, okay, what? And he goes, get very comfortable asking for reviews and get very comfortable signing books for people. And I'm so glad he shared this with me, because I would have been one of those very weird people who like, oh, we signed my book. And I'm like, uncomfortable about it because it's uncomfortable for me.
Right.
And the way that this guy said it, he goes, if it's uncomfortable for you, it's going to be very uncomfortable for them. And I was like, okay, how do I make this comfortable for myself? So to that end, we created some bookmarks that we can put into the book. And I think very deeply about the person. If I'm signing it for someone, I should know a little bit about them. So I'll go through and I'll bookmark the 2 chapters that I think are most meaningful for that person. And that removes any kind of weird mental friction I have around like signing this book and saying, hey, I believe that this is going to help you. Like, please let me know how this works for you. So, just little things like that make it easy. Now I get excited about, dropping a book in the mail and sending it off to someone, and things like that.
That's, so much good stuff. So I think one of the biggest takeaways from all of that is that you can't do it alone. I think when you have your own business, I think a lot of the journey we take is like alone, right? Like we feel like, oh, I have to figure this out alone. But lately, even beyond book writing, you can't do it alone. Like, don't even try to do it alone. Like, start to find your people, whether you're hiring people, whether you're networking, whether whatever, like do it with people. And that's going to shortcut things. It's going to make it more pleasurable and it's going to be more effective, at the end of the day. But especially with book writing, like from the editing to the marketing to all the full process, you need a team, right? In a way.
I think it depends upon what you're trying to do with the book, right? And I do not believe that my book would exist if it wasn't for the fact that I have a really amazing editor who knows my stuff inside and out, right? Because if they don't know your stuff inside and out, and Melissa and I have worked together for 4 years now, right? I'm sorry, 3 years now, right? So I did the business for 1 year just on my own. And then I had this crazy idea of I should bring my partner in, and both of our families were like, are you sure this is a good idea? And I'm like, guys, like, we're not building a puzzle together all day long every day. Hey, she has her stuff, I have my stuff, it's going to be okay. And the other thing is during that time, it was in the middle of the pandemic and I was struggling inside of my business. And so part of it was really figuring out, do I want to continue down this path? What needs to change for it to be good and solid in the future? And then also just really trying to solidify, because we'd started doing placements during that time and placing salespeople into organizations. And the thing that everyone said was, John, I want someone who's trained like you. I'm like, well, that's a little bit harder to do, right? Because while
Right.
I've spent a lot of time in like some very popular sales methodologies, some of it doesn't connect to how I sell. It doesn't connect to how I act in the moment of the sales call.
Right.
So I wanted to be mindful of that. And so that's also part of where the book came from of, can we actually teach somebody a method that improves over like traditional outcomes? And so that's where Sherpa, the methodology came from, and the frameworks that we used inside of there. So it was kind of a great convergence of things, but I was also going live on a daily show every morning, right? And my friend was a marketer and I'm a salesperson. We're kind of sharing and upskilling each other because we're both struggling in the middle of this pandemic, and accountability was the thing that got us through. So
Right.
we're going live every morning, talking about what's on the calendar, the meetings that we have set, the things that we're struggling with. And we got very in the weeds. Okay, so what's on the calendar? I got this call, this call, this call, and I'm going to write 1,500 words today. Okay, cool. And then like the next day, how to go.
Right.
What I didn't realize at the time is it's not remarkably difficult for me to sit down and write 1,500 words, right? Because of all the other kind of practices and things that I've done around trying to be creative and be thoughtful and not, I'm a very rigid person, very black or
Right.
white. And usually that leads to not being very creative or artistic. And I've struggled with that for most of my life. And it wasn't until all of this happened that some of my practice changed, and it opened up a lane to where I really thought I could be creative. And so that was also part of it. What are you telling yourself, right, as you're going through this process? If it's, oh, I'm garbage, this is trash, why am I even doing this and everything, it's gonna be remarkably difficult to get to the end of something that you're proud of putting out there. But
Right.
if you can just create on like a daily basis, right, use the artist's way, use journaling, use whatever these things are, put it on your calendar and make it a non-negotiable. Like when you're consistent in the creative process, creative things start to happen, right? But you can't just do that in like okay, great, I'm going to write all day Monday. It doesn't really work that way, at least not for me, right? I have to do
Right.
a little bit every day.
Yeah, I see when I see myself going back to the book, because there's a lot written already, but there's still some stuff I want to write. I see myself maybe setting aside like 2 weeks to like get it going and then keep writing, kind of do like a
Mhm.
writing retreat.
Yeah.
And that way I can get into the mindset of it, because it just feels like a really different type of task than anything else I've done in my business. And I wanted to ask you, so when you started writing your book, did you have in mind, like, did you really have a clear picture of like, this is a marketing tool for my business?
Mhm.
And did you have an idea of like how that was going to look, or did you just start writing? You're like, I just want to write a book. I'll later figure out how this ties into like my offers or like my launches or blah, blah, blah.
That's a good question. um I want to say a little bit of both, but I think I'm saying that looking back on it now, right? Because
Right.
we kind of got lucky in the fact that the people that the book speaks to are the people that I can have the best outcomes with. Like we
Right.
weren't intentionally being like, okay, great, let's write this book. So that way, like creative people and marketing people and brand people and these kinds of like freelancers and these things can come in here and use it.
Right.
Those were just the people that I've been coaching and
Right.
talking to and building process for. So and that also really aligns with me because I ran a website design company before doing any of this stuff here. So that hyper creative where there's like lots of concern about scope creep and can you hit
Right.
their expectations, even know what those expectations are, and things like that was where I was coming out of. So
Right.
it
Right.
kind of got a little bit lucky there. I think we would be much more intentional with like, okay, who is the book for? Okay, great. What do those people need to see in this thing? So I think we would have started with a better outline for it. I think we got a little bit lucky with the first one.
Well,
But
if you're intuitively aligned with that, it's going to happen, right? One way or another. And
exactly.
then later in the editing process, that can always be shifted a little bit as well, right? I think.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I just knew the things that I wanted to talk about because I knew that they were important to like selling like John does, right? Which
Right.
is still kind of a weird thing for here to hear people say, because I've had lots of people say, well, John, you're not really a salesperson. And so that's true. Okay. So what does someone need to know? Like what elements do I need to pull out of my head and show this person very meaningfully so that way they have the best chance possible of selling in a way that I found value in and so many other people have as well.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And I think a lot of people, when they start writing a book, whether you are intentional about it or not, it's going to help, your audience. And so if that's like your intention, like, I just want to help more people, because
Yeah.
buying a book is more accessible. It's easier, right? It's all this
Yeah.
stuff. And so, and I think it's just a great way to, yeah, to market, but also just to like get out there. And then the people who already love, like, trust you are still going to buy it. They're still going to want to
Yeah.
hear your voice.
Absolutely.
And so it works both ways, I think, in many ways.
I remember the first time I got a phone call from someone because like I'd sent him the book. We weren't even published yet or anything. And I'd sent the book to a friend of mine, and he immediately reached out, and I was like, "Whoa, are you okay?" And he goes, "Yeah, dude, we have to talk about this." And I said, "What?" And he goes, "I'm not even through with the introduction yet, and I've already determined that I've been very wrong." And I'm like, "What do you mean wrong about what?" And he goes, "I've been wrong about selling. I did not think that I could do it and do it well and not compromise everything that I thought was important." And I was like, "Well, okay, well, what's changed?" And he was like, "You have this line in the intro, sales is noble." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, yeah." And that, like, I'm expecting something else connected to this thing. And that was enough for him, that
Right.
you could do it and be noble, and that lots of people do it from a noble place and things like that. And so then that has happened a handful of times, right? And it's happened from people who I know from other like places in my life. Like I'm a martial arts huge fan. I've practiced for about 18 years as an adult, studied mostly in two arts. And so one of my kung fu brothers reached out to me there because I'd given I'd given a copy of the book to both him and his partner, knowing that his partner was much more of like a business type.
Right.
And then he read the book and he stopped me and he was like, "Well, man, we got to talk about this. We got to talk about what, you know." And he goes, "You gave me and my wife a great book, and I have to tell you that I've been wrong." And I'm like, "Wrong? Like, help me understand. Like, what do you mean wrong about what?" And he goes, "I thought that I couldn't sell kung fu, that I couldn't be proactive with it, that I couldn't put myself out there without it
Right.
being just a sham." And I was like, "Whoa, like, let's talk more about this," right? And when you look at people who are doing highly creative work, graphic designers, copywriters, content creators, and things like this, like, it is tied to their creative process. And lots of people get very confused about sales and a creative thing, and are you selling out? And but if you're
Yeah.
in a business and it's paying for your revenue, it's gotta hit a certain level. It has to be something. It can't just be like a hobby. It needs to be a business, right? And so
Yeah.
you can sell proactively without sacrificing everything else underneath that.
Yeah. No, and it's interesting because that ties into the book writing process too, because that could be very creative and very broad, in terms of what you give there. But
Mhm.
it almost feels like podcasting, because the way someone gets to know you through a book is just, there's no other way. Like, you can't compare it
Yep.
to anything. And you're like in their body now, you're in their head. And so they know you. And so they're reaching out to you with these conversations because you're in their world. Even if you had that relationship, now they're like, your relationship with them has changed, and
Yeah.
you're able to impact so many more people. But it's not just about more. It's like that quality of that connection of someone reading
Yeah.
your stuff or listening, if you do like an audio version as well, can
Yeah.
be really powerful.
I think content is content, right, at this stage. And while I've always been a fan and an advocate of like creating content, putting yourself out there, I've written on LinkedIn almost daily for about 5 years now. And so when you get really into that stuff, it's a muscle. I firmly believe that creativity is a muscle, and if you don't run your life and your schedule in a way that allows you to be creative, it's going to be very hard to do, right, just on a
Mhm.
consistent basis. The other thing that I think is really interesting is I was expecting it to create some status, right? Which it
Right.
does, right? I've had people who will take a meeting with me just because they've hit my LinkedIn page and they see that I have a book. "Oh my
Mhm.
God, John has a book. We should have a call." What I wasn't expecting to have happen is how it changed people who already knew me. Like,
Right.
because you kind of have this vision of like, "Oh, these are my people. These are people who know me. These are my referral, partners and everything else like that." When you show up and you've got a great piece of content, whether it's a podcast or a video cast or a live stream or a book or an amazing case study, and you show up for those people and they get to read it, and it has a tangible impact on them, they also change. And, oh, well, holy crap. Like, I've had some people be like, "Oh, John, you're pretty serious about this stuff." I'm like,
Right.
"Yeah, I am." Like, it needs to change. There's plenty of room for sales to change in B2B and selling creative services. And it doesn't need to be done as a commodity. And if I can help more people do that at a lower price point, because coaching is supposed to be expensive, right? Like
Right.
it should be. If you're helping someone on a one-on-one basis and they're having a transformative experience under your guidance and tutelage, that's phenomenal. That's fantastic. Not everybody's ready to be coached though,
Right.
right? And so for the people who you know you're going to be showing this to, right? You know, there's this idea of like, well, if I don't close this, there's this opportunity that is out the door and everything, right? So using a book or using some content to educate and inform, now it's part of my sales process. Well, John, I think we should work together. Cool. I think you should read the book first, and I'm happy to send it to you for absolutely free. I'm not asking you to go buy it, but if you're at all unsure, you should read the book, and then you will know with absolute certainty if there's room for us to work together or not. And if not, I would rather you just tell me no.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And it's almost like a filter, like another way, because
Absolutely.
the clients who know you and get to know you through your content, it's a good fit, and they've like gotten to know you, and when they reach out and you make sure it's a good fit, it's like, it's really fast how you're able to sell them and get
Yes,
them on board
absolutely.
because they've already gotten to know you. And then the clients who aren't a good fit, it's like they just self-select, right? Because they read the book or they read whatever and it wasn't good, and it's fine. So it really helps with that whole ecosystem.
Yep.
And I think as a process as well, like the parts that I have written have already forced me to get really clear about what I want to say, because there's so many things I could say, but the book, it is very different than, for example, blog writing, which is a lot of the coaching I do, in that you have to have this like higher level vision of like what you want to transmit. And so that, I think that happens through having an editor, having a book coach for sure, because they're able to help you see that bigger vision that maybe you struggle. It's hard to see that on your own, like I think in many cases.
The other thing, and you mentioned this at the front end of the conversation, we did the audiobook as well, right? So we put the book out, I think June or July, it's a bit of a blur. And then we got the audiobook done in December. And reading through the audiobook, I had a couple of moments of like, oh, I talk about this a little bit differently. I talk about, you know, and once again, it kind of just flared up in my head of like, oh, should you really be doing this? Should you be, you know, well, that's why people do updated and expanded editions, you know. I just listened to Freakonomics for like the first time. And while I love the podcast, that this is my first time working my way through the audiobook. And the audiobook was updated because they'd uncovered some new data points and some new things in the stories that they shared in the original edition. You know, blog posts get updated, right? You know, you come in, you update it for 2022 versus the 2021 ultimate guide and stuff like that. So just like that's accessible in blogging, there's also a book version of that. And, you know, abridged, unabridged, new editions, different things like that. You know, while before this, I was like, this is just money grabs. These are just ways for these people to like kind of redo the thing. But it is a shifting environment, you know, like what works today as a salesperson and in the digital landscape didn't exist 4 or 5 years ago, right? The concept of like hanging out in Slack communities to network wasn't a thing really before the pandemic. You know, so it is a changing environment. We have to be mindful of that.
I love that. Yeah, no. And I think that creates a level of flexibility of like, you don't have to include everything, and you can also change your mind, you know, like you can go back, and how noble would it be to say, hey, in the previous edition, like I kind of got it wrong, or like I've changed my mind about something. And that, I think that change also catches people's eyes, because I think there's just this misconception of like, you have to know it all, you have to be like this guru. And that's changing a lot to like, I'm contributing, like, this is my voice. And if you don't like it, that's okay. Like there's tons of other people, and like it's sales with SEO too. There's so many parallel approaches. And so, and a lot of people look for like that one person, but I just say like, find whoever feels good and it works, right? If it works for you, like, who am I to say like, oh, it's wrong or whatever.
Absolutely. That, and like, once again, thinking that way will allow creativity to be there and blossom, because it's like, you know what, this isn't for forever. I'm not carving this in stone tablets and I'm not ever going to be able to do anything with ever again. You know, there is going to be some room. And, you know, that's another reason why I think community is so good, right? Because if you create that community space where people can come and give you that feedback and like, okay, how do you do with this? You know, you're, in my opinion, doing the best job you can about setting yourself up for success as, you know, to put it in finger quotes, being a thought leader, right? Putting
Right.
yourself out there. And I think that if you're a consultant, a coach, if you're running an agency, or if you're doing anything in like the digital marketing space, or anything that comes from your background, that allows you to provide kind of outcomes, especially on a strategic level. If you don't have a book, you're going to spend so much more time like educating your prospects, right? So
Right.
from just purely from a sales perspective, right? Do you want your salesperson or potentially founder to be doing all those education points, or do you want to send them to a YouTube video, a blog post, or a book,
Mhm.
or whatever makes the most sense? Writing the book was the way that I think about content. I can sit down, I could pump out 15 to 3,000 words just about this conversation that we're having right here. Like
Right.
it's not hard for me to do. Thinking about video content is very hard for me to do. Like I hit a wall. Like, oh, you want me to do what? And with, so part of it is, where do you people hang out? What do they want to digest? There's a whole bunch of sales literature, right? There's a whole bunch of sales books out there. And, I'm glad to be kind of part of that, but also, maybe a bunch of blog posts really well done and really well distributed would have gotten the same kind of growth accomplished. I don't know that to be true, but it is something that people should be thinking about. I don't think everyone needs to write a book, but if you don't have that like education in a form, you're going to have longer selling cycles and lots of people who dip out on you later stage.
Yeah, and I think I agree. Like, I think you get to choose and be strategic about it. I also feel like if you want to write something, just write it. And I
Agreed.
also feel like there's something special about having physical copy that you can mail people. Like, that feels so, I can't imagine that feeling of signing things. Like, I want that feeling because I love books. I love physical books.
too.
I like digital books too. I'm very nerdy and I like all the written forms, but there's something about the paper, right? And if you're able, and I think that catches your audience's eye, it depends your audience, right? But in
Yep.
general, people I think would be pleasantly surprised to receive a book in the mail, and have like
Yeah.
your writing, your ink, in there.
Mhm. Now I have had, I do lots of networking, and I try to offer the book to anybody who I think would read it and have a positive outcome on it, right?
Right.
Some people I'm like, hey, maybe you should go buy this thing because I don't really know that it's going to help you, but if you're a founder, if you're a salesperson, or if you're anywhere at all interested about revenue, the book is going to help you, right? And for those people, I'm happy to share it with people. What's interesting is whenever I've had some people who I've wanted to work with or do a partnership with or something like that, and they're like, the book wasn't enough for them. And like,
Right.
that's a weird space because you're going to get lots of people who are very excited for you, especially
Yeah.
if you've been in the game for a little bit, networking, if you have a good client book and stuff. So like, that was a weird thing the first time I tried to reach out to someone who's a bit of a sales and marketing influencer, and they were like, oh man, this is low level stuff. I don't need this at all. And I was kind of like, okay. So they like the weirdness and the walls that just kind of pop up in different spots for everybody, but those have been mine, right? Like signing a book before having that conversation, if someone had come to me and been like, hey John, we signed a book for me, I would have been, who, me, which is not the thing that they're looking for. They're just excited to meet someone who wrote something that they had positive experience with,
Right.
right? And for me, like, I love books. We have a library in our house, and I can imagine walking up to like one of my favorite authors and be like, hey, we signed this, and like, it's just a pile of words, or try to be like deflective or like downplay and stuff like this, and that would ruin it for me,
Right.
so I had just enough of that bandwidth to see all that stuff to really want to not do that to anybody else who read the book and had a positive experience out of it.
Yeah, but that weirdness is going to happen whatever you put out there, right? Let's be honest. Like,
sure,
it's a numbers
sure,
thing.
yes.
And like, for that one person, how many other people have said like, yeah, this has been really helpful. It changed my life, blah, blah, blah. So you gotta, it's like part of whatever you want to call it, part of the game of being out there. And
For sure.
people are gonna, I remember getting my first hate email, and at first I was devastated. And then I think it took me a couple hours. I was like, this is so cool. Someone took the time to actually write to me and say how much they hated. It was like a newsletter or something, it wasn't even, and it was like, oh, like, thank you. Like, so you gotta.
It's a very weird thing, because I love any feedback. Like, I got a review the other day because I go in there and I read all the reviews myself and make sure that I'm caught up with them. And I got one that said, this seems a little too simple to be true. So I've read the book. I've taken some notes, and now I'm going to sit and wait and see if it manifests in my life. And, on one level, like the pragmatic sales coach and martial arts instructor is like, you're not going to change, right? Because like this stuff doesn't just show up in front of you, because there are parts of a sales conversation that are emotionally charged, right? And if you're not prepared for those emotional moments, you're going to react however your nature tells you to do so. If you've never been tested, if you've never been trained, you don't know what you're going to come with, to those moments. And so I want to grab that person and say, hey, like, thank you for this. But I also kind of want to grab them and be like, you need to practice, right? Because like I make that statement in the book that like, when you finish the book, you are now on a path to being a really top-notch sales professional, but it's not enough. You still have to practice and put in the work and be thoughtful, and be thoughtful about the space you take up and how you're helping others. It's not a thing where you just read a book and you put it down. You're like, oh, I've now gotten it. We're not like Neo in the Matrix to where you download how to fly a helicopter. It doesn't work that way, unfortunately.
Wouldn't that be cool? Yeah. Cool, John. Oh my God, so much good stuff. So kind of wrapping things up, what would you say is like one for someone who's started to write, or they're thinking of writing, like what would you say to that person who's like just on that first step, camp one?
Well, I would say a couple of things. One, don't edit. Like separate those activities if you can, and so that way your writing process can be more or less stream of consciousness tied to a theme, right? So like I would have a chapter that I knew what, like one of my favorite chapters is one about personalities and how they show up as a salesperson. And that stuff I'm steeped on. We have a podcast about it. Like I knew it very inside and out. So it wasn't a big thing for me to sit and write that content. But if I'd been sitting down and being like, okay, great, how do I want this content to like show up? I wouldn't even know how to start, right? So having that, and then if you go back to it yourself, that's okay. If you want to hire an editor, or like Melissa now has had such a great experience with our book, where she's ghostwriting for other people, ghost editing for other people, right? As a service, because it was awesome. Like, and there's so much more that she did that was helpful. Like, you want to talk about a weird moment, like go create your Amazon listing. What and she did all that for me, as far as like, okay, what kind of buckets is it going to be in, how we're going to talk about this thing. That would have been a nightmare for me. I would have overthought it. I would still be thinking about like how we're going to talk about the description of the book that I've already written. So work with someone who you trust, who you trust to kind of like edit, but do it well. And then that would be probably the first thing. The second thing, accountability, right? Like, if creativity of writing is not something that you get energy out of, it's something that energizes me as an introvert. But if it doesn't, you need to set a KPI, you need to set a daily goal. And that could be a number of words, it could be a certain amount of time, it could be, whatever this thing is. But the things you don't want to do are the things you need to have goals around, right? And if writing is a struggle for you and doing it consistently is a struggle for you, that needs to be something that you're kind of like setting some harsh goals around and some accountabilities. That way you make sure that you get it done.
I love it. Yep. So good. Thank you so much. Where can people hang out with you, find you, and I don't know, maybe get your book too?
Yeah. So the book is on Amazon. If you search for Selling from Scratch, you'll be able to find the PDF version. We have the Kindle the Kindle version. We also have the Audible version. The Audible version was really cool. I recorded it here, actually in this room. I built like a little kind of studio set around me. Really great mic. Got some help there. Melissa, my editor, it ended up doing all the editing around the audiobook to kind of put it together. And so all those three formats are on Amazon. If you want to learn more about what we do as a company, my company is called Adapted Growth, and we're at adaptedgrowth.com. And we do everything from ongoing reinforcement training around like sales EQ and how to ask better questions, all the way up to doing placements and fractional sales leadership in the marketing or cool B2B space. So if you're doing something like very like old school manufacturing and warehousing, I might not be the right one to work with, because it's not really kind of the thing that I enjoy selling. But if you're selling something that's conceptual, that's tied to any kind of creativeness, those are the things I love helping people sell.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you so much, John.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.